Thank you and welcome. I've never heard myself referred to as the IPCC professor. I don't think it quite works that way. However, I am a coordinating lead author in the IPCC Working Group 2 on regional context of climate information, which of course steers a lot of the risk assessment and adaptation decision making. So I'll make a few comments about that. I'm just going to introduce the session. I don't want to talk too much. We really want to hear from the speakers. And the discussion, of course, is a major time that we really want to focus on. We heard about the Climate Action in Megacities report being released yesterday. There's obviously a huge amount of work going on. It's really exciting. I work a lot in the stakeholder community from an academic perspective, and it's really reassuring to see the type of actions that are being taking place and the awareness and sensitivity that's going on with this. We know that many cities are responding. Unfortunately, speaking from an African context, I also know many cities that aren't responding. So in a way, what we're doing here is C40 is leading the way, and you're leading the way. And cities are a place to bring that awareness to the forefront. So let me give you a little bit of a context, and I don't want to dwell too long on this, but try and bring a little bit of context from an IPCC experience. So we've been working in the IPCC for 3 years now on this report that will be released next month. And it's been a long, difficult process because it is a very complicated area that we're trying to speak into. But we can take some basic messages that I think we all know, but I think is worth reinforcing, is that urban areas hold more than half the world's population. Africa, where I'm situated mostly, crossed that 50% threshold last year sometime. And so urban areas are critical. Cities are complex, and particularly interdependent systems. And one of the failures, I believe, about the academic community is they've treated the climate change issue in a single context setting. So they talk about what's happening to the water, what's happening to temperature, what's happening to this or that. But the interaction of these factors is what's often pushing the system and stressing the system, and particularly that of scale. And I'm going to come back to this one. I think I'm really concerned about the issues of scale of the information that's leading our decisions. Because as you go to finer scales, the uncertainty grows. And we need to be very, very careful of how defensible our information is. There are also issues around the contested definitions and approaches to assessing risk, and how you consequently choose adaptation pathways. Those contested definitions steer how you frame a question, how you frame an issue. And if you have a different definition, if you have a different community with a different definition or understanding of that, you have a contestation about how to treat your risk assessment and how you'll treat your vulnerability. And IPCC has put quite a bit of effort onto that if you look at the report coming out, which I think is really important if we understand that we are in a position to make decisions on behalf of communities and understand the role that we have and responsibility associated with that. And then particularly I want to highlight the issue of thresholds. Climate change pushes systems across thresholds. And climate change is not just the temperature. It's when the temperature, when the rainfall, when the extreme event, what other physical systems are happening, and how they happen in combination that affects whether a system is going to cross a threshold or not. And so the adaptation is essential to be predicated on clear understanding on the combinatory nature of how the system is pushed against thresholds. And of course, every city has different thresholds. We did an interesting study with the city of Maputo last year. And one of their critical thresholds was a very strong non-climatic stressor, which we didn't realize until we went through a long process to explore it. And it turns out to be border control with South Africa, affecting the city system because of the combinatory approach of all these factors. So I think thresholds is a very interesting way to frame some of the risk assessment questions. But primarily, I'd like to just put down as a context for this discussion what, from my perspective, are two issues that are really important. The one is, what information do you use to inform your vulnerability assessment, your risk assessment, and your adaptation decision making? What pathway that it puts you on? We run an exercise with stakeholders where we give them a set of information and ask them to work that through to a policy decision. And then we add to that information. We progressively add detail to the information and plot the trajectory of how their decision changes as they add more information. And it often goes through a stage where you can end up with a resultant decision that is in contrast to the initial decision, purely on the amount and choice of information that is chosen to inform the process. So I think we need to be very careful. I often use the phrase, is the information plausible? Does it look like planet Earth? Is it defensible? Can I say why it looks like that? And is it actionable? Would I spend my own money on it? And those criteria are an interesting one to explore when one goes through the process. The other one, which is closely related, is the ethics of choice. And we recently had in the climate services community a major conference in December last year, and a session on the ethics of climate services and the communication of information and the ethics and responsibilities around the decision making on behalf of communities, and how easy it is to steer communities down one or another pathway which are equiprobable and equally defensible. So those two issues, I think, are good framers to how we look at the bigger picture. Now, of course, I'm not in your communities where you're actually on the ground and carrying the responsibility, so it's easy for me to say. And I understand it's a very complex situation that we face. I would just highlight, as an IPCC author, the fifth assessment report for Working Group 2 that's coming out. Working Group 1 obviously came out at the end of last year, focused strongly on the physical climate information. Working Group 2 tries to take that information and took it into the context that you're dealing with on a daily basis. I looked through the chapters. It's a long report. It's in two parts. The first part is a sector-based, sector-focused set of chapters. The second part is regions. And in the middle is a chapter that tries to bring context of how you go from one to the other. It tries to put the pieces of the puzzle together. But I would highlight three chapters particularly: the coastal systems and low-lying areas chapter, the urban areas chapter, and the regional context chapter, as a way to frame a lot of the city's issues that are faced. But there is a lot of very solid information across the whole report, so I hope you will be paying close attention. I can't speak specifically to it because it's embargoed at this point. If you haven't seen the draft reports, the full report will be coming out in late March. So with that, we have three speakers this morning, and they will be speaking for their cities. We won't take questions after each talk, but we'll hold your questions till the end. And at that point, we will have an open discussion. Initially, we'll have a brief input from the City of Johannesburg, and then open discussion. So please record your messages, hold on to them, hold on to your questions, and hopefully we'll have a vibrant discussion at the end of the time. We're going to open up with Sandro Caparelli, speaking for the City of Venice.
Hello to everybody. Dear fellows, my name is Sandro Caparelli. I work for the City of Venice. First of all, I would like you to excuse me for my English. I will be not so fast as Bruce was, but I hope to be clear at least. So I will talk, today I will talk to you about the activity of the City of Venice facing the climate risk. And we'll start with a brief history of adaptations, actions through the centuries, then what we are doing now with the new projects, then we'll have some open problem that we have on our agenda now. First of all, what are we talking about? You see in the picture, this is Venice. This is there is a big lagoon, as you see, connected with the sea by 3 inlets. This one here, 1, 2, okay. It's not so easy to get the picture from here, but you can see it. In the middle of the lagoon, there is the Water City, the well-known artistical and historical heritage, and we have on the mainland the biggest part of the city. In the mainland, there is also the important chemical industrial pole that was one of the biggest in Europe. And the lagoon is 51 kilometers in one side and 12 kilometers on the other side, and so it's quite a big space. And all of this system, the lagoon and the ancient city, has been inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage list as a whole, as a cultural and artistical and environmental heritage to protect. So it's not just water, it's not just buildings, it's a whole. Okay, this photograph shows you some archaeological findings that we found in the lagoon, and as you see, there are it was about buildings in the Roman age. Since 4th and 5th centuries, we have results of activity of raising pavements of the building and of the islands, the borders of the islands, to protect the inhabitants from the rising of the sea, from the high tides that it's still an issue today for us. The Serenissima Republic took great care to protect and to maintain the lagoon in the asset that you see also today, similar, because as you know, lagoon is the result of a constant conflict between the rivers and the sea, the rivers that bring ground and that builds islands, and the sea that tries to put away this to put away it and try to make it become open sea. At a certain time during the 15th century, there has been this, the Republic moved out from the lagoon the three big rivers that was arriving inside the lagoon to avoid the risk to have the lagoon completely filled by ground. Then, at the end of the Serenissima, around the 18th century, they had to build these walls that goes through along this long island here. You can see a section here to protect the lagoon from the waves of the sea. Raising pavements went on through the centuries. You see photographs of actual intervention, recent, and we are still doing it, but at some time we decided to stop this activity because we decided to preserve, to save, to maintain the architectural heritage. So it's not a decision, a technical issue, has been a cultural decision to not to go ahead raising the city, to maintain the architectural high value buildings. At a certain time in 1966, we had the big one. The big one event as a flood, and it's called it's acqua alta. This is the way it means high water, and it happened in that day, kind of a perfect storm where two consecutive high tides has been summed one on each other, because the first tide could not came out from the lagoon to the sea because the strong wind was keeping the water inside. So the second high tide, both of them were exceptional level, got one on the other, and we had 192 centimeters of water over the mean of the normal tide. As you see in the three photos on the left, was that Murazzi that you saw in the section before, and the waves of the sea were overcoming this, and it looked like that Venice could be destroyed by an event like this. So after 6 years, 7 years in fact, the national parliament approved a special law for the safeguard of Venice, and this is an important moment because it established the work that is still going on. And it's interesting to note that for this law this law is really advanced conception for the safeguarding of a city. And they spent these 7 years, this long 7 years discussion to do something good. It's still interesting to note that we have 4 pillars, 4 goals that has to be reached in the same time. The morphological intervention to preserve the lagoon, the clearing the water from the pollution, the safeguard of the socio-economic side aspect of the city. We want a city to be alive with people living and working, and that includes the port activity. And then the safeguarding of the heritage, the architectural, the artistic and historic heritage. So since this time, Venice became a national issue with a lot of money spent during 30 years and involving all the level of governments. This law still coordinates all the actors that works on Venice. This is the big result of this activity, the big operates Moses system. Is going to work in 2 days, in 2 years. Our mobile barriers that are going to close the 3 inlets. And while it's not working, the barriers will stand in the bottom of the gates and let the water pass and not to modify the landscape of the lagoon. It's more than 5 billion euros work. It's a big opera. While we were waiting for the MOSE to be operational, the city still had to go ahead working and living. So there's a great activity of adaptation of the behaviors of the citizens. And the most part depends on the early warning system, so monitoring, forecasting, and spreading information to the population. You see on the newspaper every day there are the forecasts of the tides, and when an exceptional tide is forecasted, there is a system, multimodal, with SMS, website, and telephone calls, and also there are some sirens, sounds spread in the city to alert the people with the 3 hours at least of before the big event, so the people can by himself adapt his activity to the event. You see the woman taking off the water from his shop. The other activity of Venice as a resilient city, the urban maintenance, that it's about raising the pavements, but also to set in a safe way the technological nets, electricity. Now when there is high tide, there are no problem. The city still works, the electricity, it's everything working. It's not so comfortable to have all this water, but the city survives. We have a volunteer organization to preserve the cultural heritage and citizens that can intervene to safeguard the works, the artistic works. And an important antivirus system that's all around the city that allow to use sweet water, not salty water that could damage the operas. And this is another huge work promoted by the government, the city, in fact, in this case. But all these activities led the United Nations to give a prize as a role model city, champion for the cultural heritage protection as a resilient city. Oh, I see I have to rush. Okay, this is our new work we are setting off. It's the Venice Climate Plan, and it's the manifesto that will before that we wrote down before the real plan that will arrive next year. And it's about the context definition, as Bruce said before. There is an activity foreseen for climate risk assessment that derives from the emergency plan with the various assessments. And, okay, the time has finished. I have just a slide more. And we have the 4 big activity that we are going to plan the projects and actions in the future on. But we have some open problems, as I told you. It's about deciding which kind of city we want in the future. This mosaic system, we can say that will give us 100 years more to reflect and think what we're going to do with the water city, because the sea level is going to rise and all the stuff are getting worse. So we have just 1 century more to understand what to do, how to manage this situation in a system that is brand new in the world history. And we have to manage both the water city, now to become a theme park, and the mainland city to improve the quality of the city, to make better livable places and workable places, hopefully converting the industrial pole in a green economy site. And okay, we hope C40 will help us to resolve these problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandro. I appreciated your statement. Venice is a heritage and a home. So, let's move straight on then to Rodrigo Rosa for Rio de Janeiro.
I'm a bit short, so I have to adjust. I never like these things because I can't see much of it. But anyway, thanks for being here. I'm gonna speak a little. This was interesting to see how Venice has adapted and turned to be resilient for so many centuries, I would say. Rio has the same situation in its specific way. What is a city? A city is a combination of nature and people and human occupation. Rio is a coastal city, delta city, and the topography is very hilly. I don't know if you had the time to visit, you should. It's a great city, but it also brings a great challenge. This is a picture of a favela in Rio. We have about 20% of the population living in favela. It's about 1.4 million. And we have to deal with this when we manage a city like Rio that is beautiful and it's very special because of that, but also brings these challenges. And we're all talking about resilience here. And one key aspect of resilience is climate. That is the main focus of C40 and most of the discussions that we have here. This is a definition of the Rockefeller Foundation. What is resilience in cities? It's basically increase the capability of cities to deal with problems, to keep functioning on its basis well. You have some of the characteristics of a resilient city there. You need always a backup and extra capacity, flexibility to deal with flexibility to deal with non-expected factors, limit flaws, restore normalcy, constant learning. But we also think on 3 times of resilience. You have to deal with the past, and you have shown Venice how has dealt with past for so many years. You have to manage this on an everyday basis, and the mayors that are here know that how hard it is to. You have one problem at a time. It's hard sometimes to plan ahead and prepare for the worst. And of course, you have to think about the future. And climate change, it's a big risk, major factor of risk, and it's changing the way we are managing our cities. Those are the big vulnerabilities in Rio, climate vulnerabilities, I would say. You see a picture from a landslide that usually happens when you have tropical rain, especially in the summertime, and also floods. Maybe not as strong as in Venice, but we also, when you have high tides and big heavy storms, you also have floods that really hurt the functioning of the city. And also, the IPCC forecasts shows that I can't read much. Some increase of the frequency and intensity of the rains in Rio, floods and landslides. Also, we're increasing temperatures and heat in the city. We're facing currently the warmest summer in 15 years in Rio. We have yesterday 57 degrees Celsius. The Mayor Paes has mentioned that on his inaugural speech yesterday. Also, there is a potential elevation of sea level, as we know by the projection of the IPCC. And this is changing how we are managing and planning our city. We have strengthened some investment in resilience. Brazil is known as, we Brazilians like to say that we're blessed by God because there's no earthquakes or hurricanes or typhoons. But that created also a little bit a situation of looseness and not being prepared for those external factors and disasters. And recently, we have, especially in Rio, we have changed that mindset to a more planned and perspective way. This is some of the investment in resilience in the city. We have strengthened our investment in infrastructure. This is investments on slope contention. It went up from 41 million to 190 million in the last 4 years. Also reforestation, and this is a change of mindset as well. Usually reforestation is not so combined with the resilience might, but it really helps and is the cheap way to keep our hills and our forests safe for the people. We have a very successful program of reforestation using poor communities to reforestate the favelas that also have an environmental issue. I'm not going to go through all the details of it. We have basically arranged all those initiatives in organizing to a plan. Trying to look also not only to short-term but also to long-term planning, and we need to needing to increase the resilience in the city in several ways. It's the first city in Brazil to develop a plan like that. We're trying to coordinate and anticipate some future scenarios. Climate change is one of the scenarios that we are considering on our plan. We're creating a tool to manage this. I'm going to talk a little later on the risk matrix that we're developing. And disseminate, you have to be resilient not only in public office, in the public administration, but also with the people. You only turn the city resilience if you really reach the person that is living in the favela, the lady that's to be aware when there is a big rain coming and has to say, find a better safe for the family. And this is the main axis of the resilience strategy that we have. We basically divide in intelligence. That means using data to better decision making. We're doing a very strong plan. And I don't know if you have had the opportunity to know or to visit our Center of Operations. That's a high-end situation room that coordinates the information of all the departments in the city and makes us decision make much better. We have a 24-hour, 7 days a week people from all departments there making decisions at right time. When we implemented the Center of Operations, the mayor would say, I don't want any files or any paperwork here. I want decisions to be made. When you have a disaster or extreme event like that, you need to be effective. Also, there is operations. You always can make processes better and the administration, traffic, cleaning more efficient, so you turn to more resiliency. Infrastructure, I've spoke to you, we did a big investment on slope contention and contention of floods in the city. And building these huge water tanks to prevent floods, and also human training. As I said, you have not only to have the municipal administration prepared and the mayor and the public officials set to act, but also you need to talk to people to involve and engage the communities. We have also incorporated in the center of operation this radar that is helping us to have a much better prediction on rains and the weather forecast. With an analysis, a risk mapping analysis in the city of the high risk areas of landslides, we were able to find that 24,500 families were living in high risk areas. That made the public's intervention much better on how to act and reduce the risk in the best way for the city. And now we're developing this new tool for urban risk management that is basically a risk matrix. This is human training, as I said. We have trained 150 communities, and this is a picture of a siren. You mentioned you use sirens. Sometimes it's not only about the fancy technology, it's about to do the old instruments also. They function very well. Whenever you have a big rain in Brazil, in Rio, now we train. We have trained over 5,000 people to be prepared, and we have they know what to do, and they have places to go. But this is a learning process, and we're starting. We're sophisticating it. It's not only about weather events. It's about extreme events in general, but it really affects the functioning of the city. This is I'm not going to go too much of the details. There's no time, but this is a matrix for risk reduction defined by the Hyogo protocol. And basically you have the 5 strong steps that our city has to follow to become more resilient. This is good because it turns to be a manual for all cities that are organizing their plan. And in Rio, we're developing this risk management platform that's basically evaluating risks and then identifying risk when you do the risk assessment. As I mentioned, the picture with the high risk areas indicated, and but also analyzing risk. You need to get that information and prepare that for decision making, and later on you also have to manage that risk and how you better act or turn the administration more efficient to reduce that risk. Those are the priorities also defined in the Hyogo protocol. Of course, preservation of life is the number 1, but there's the 9 big ones, and those are the 9 big factors that in the city that you have to look for when you want to preserve and increase the resilience of the city. We have developed this risk matrix you can see from color red, D, it's a high risk area, to letter A on green, that's a lower risk area. And the actions we have implemented have made us able to make that graphic from red to green. I'm not going to go through all the details. There's no point of getting too specific. But this is a good indicator on the resilience of the city. I'm going to end soon. This is a goal we created before the initiatives we took on 2009. When you had 40 millimeters an hour of rain in the city, we would have fatalities and deaths because of landslides. Now, 3 years from now, ojalá, is not going to happen again. You never know. Reducing his risk doesn't mean that the bad things will not happen at all. But now sometimes we face 80 millimeters an hour of rain. And still now we don't have fatalities or any deaths anymore. So it's a good quantification on the rise of the resilience in the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a wealth of information in that. I think the one that I'd love to explore further, which is perhaps the hardest, is changing mindsets, which is a hard one. Our final speaker is Leah Cohen, speaking for New York.
Thank you. So on behalf of the City of New York, I want to thank Joburg for hosting all of us here. It's been great to get together with everybody. So as all of you know, New York City about a year and a half ago was devastated by Hurricane Sandy. And in the wake of that storm, the city set up something called the Special Initiative for Rebuilding and Resiliency, which was really designed to help rebuild our impacted communities more resiliently and also think about how we could be increasing the resilience of our critical infrastructure systems and our built environment. And the mayor at the time had kind of tasked us with doing this by answering 3 questions. The first was, what happened during Sandy and why? The second was, what could happen in the future, understanding the risks from climate change. And then most importantly, the last question was, how do we rebuild the city in a way that's more resilient and also prepare for a future with climate change? So just a little bit of background on our risk assessment. So as many of you have probably heard, Sandy was a record-breaking event for New York City. The water levels at the Battery were 40% higher than our previous high record in 1960. And there were a couple of reasons for that. First of all, Sandy was unusually large. It had about a 1,000-mile wind field that pushed all of the water into the bay, causing 32-foot waves that caused a lot of structural damage along our homes on the coastal facing areas. Secondly, a kink in the jet stream, which some people have started to speculate is connected to climate change, caused the storm to take a left hook, which is pretty unusual, and that really put the city into the path of the onshore winds, which were the most damaging. And then finally, Sandy, by a freak of timing, I guess you could say, coincided with a high spring tide in the Upper Harbor, and so that just really added to a lot of the peak water levels that we were experiencing from the surge. The result of all of that was that 44 people in the city lost their lives. We had about $19 billion in damages, and then obviously a lot of people's lives were disrupted as they were displaced from their homes, and over 2.5 million people in the city lost power for a number of days. So Sandy really helped to drive home, I think, not only within the city, but among the public and in our neighborhoods, what we had already known before Sandy, which is that with 520 miles of coastline, we're a very vulnerable city, and this is only going to get worse with climate change. So thinking a little bit about some of the risks that the city faces in the future, we had convened in 2008 a group called the New York City Panel on Climate Change. It's basically our version of the IPCC, and they've helped us come up with a set of more recent projections that are built off of the AR5. And some of the things that they're showing us are that by mid-century we can expect up to 6 degrees increase in Fahrenheit in temperature, and sea level rise upwards of potentially 2.5 feet. In terms of extreme weather events, while we know that we're vulnerable to coastal storms, the panel has also predicted huge increases in the number of days over 90 degrees. And we could see a tripling of that, making us more like Birmingham, Alabama by mid-century than we are today. This is all happening on top of a new understanding that we're getting of what our current coastal risk is. So the federal government, since Sandy, has been going through a process to update the flood maps that they create for most cities across the US. And what it's showing is that we're having a doubling of people in the 100-year floodplain. We've got over 400,000 folks living in that area. We're also seeing an expected increase in 100-year flood heights of about 2.5 feet across the city. So it's more people and more structures than any other floodplain in the country, and is really going to pose some significant challenges. So to try to get at what this really meant in terms of monetary impacts, the city worked with Swiss Re to try to quantify some of the impacts of these damaging storm events. So it's a little hard to see, but what you're looking at is basically we assumed some very conservative assumptions. We said, what would the future look like with no economic development and no asset growth? And what they found was that the likelihood of a $19 billion event like Sandy by the 2020s would grow 17%, and by the 2050s, 40%. If you want to think about this a slightly different way, you could say that the likelihood of a 1 in 70-year storm event like Sandy would grow to $35 billion by the 2020s and to $90 billion by the 2050s. So what did we learn from all this? There were a couple of really key lessons, I think, that came out of Sandy for us. The first one is that our building codes really do work. What we saw during the storm is that we had essentially building stock, substandard building stock, our beach bungalows. They're one-story wood frame construction. They made up about 18% of the structures in the area that was flooded during Sandy, but 75% of the structures that were significantly damaged or destroyed. By contrast, a lot of the types of developments that we had that were actually built with flood protection standards, like Arvern by the Sea, were pretty much unscathed. So there's a little bit of a silver lining there. I think Sandy really drove home that our infrastructure systems are very interdependent and they're regional. When the power goes out, that affects everything else. We lost telecommunications power in our dense urban buildings. We lost the ability to flush toilets and access drinking water above the 6th floor. And we had a lot of vulnerable populations that were stuck in these high-rise buildings without much ability to get up and down. Similarly, we also learned that we have a lot of supply chains outside the city that are outside of our control that are very vulnerable and need to be hardened. For those of you who are looking at the news, you probably saw that we had a gasoline shortage, liquid fuel shortage, and also had some significant vulnerabilities in our food supply. The third thing is that we saw that communities that are prepared really bounced back more quickly. So we had communities like Garrettson Beach, where there was very close local ties, and they had a system of local nonprofits that helped them recover much more quickly. By contrast, other areas like our public housing developments that had pre-existing challenges, those only made sort of the response and recovery in those areas more difficult. There's been a lot of discussion about coastal protection and green versus gray infrastructure, and I think what we learned during the storm is that it's really hybrid, locally tailored solutions that work. So like at Arvern by the Sea, where you saw investments in the built environment, that was also protected by a dune, and those are the kinds of holistic strategies that we're looking to implement moving forward. Sandy, we have to remember, was really not a worst-case scenario for New York City. Had the storm arrived at a different time, we could have seen over 40% of the city's generation capacity impacted, and then we would have had a problem supplying power to the rest of the city. We know some of this stuff is only going to get worse as sea levels rise. And then finally, I think we're really focused on trying to use a lot of the funding that's coming in for disaster recovery to try to reduce these future costs of events. So what does the plan do? I'll just try to walk through this really quickly. Basically, the city's comprehensive resiliency plan lays out a multi-layered approach to try to address these issues. The first three are focused around reducing physical risk. So you've got strengthening our coastal defenses as kind of the first line of defense, trying to stop the water from getting in at the shoreline. Secondly, we're looking at upgrading our building stock to try to provide that redundancy and additional layer of protection. And then thirdly, there are a set of recommendations around protecting our critical infrastructure systems. And then finally, we're also working to make our neighborhoods safer and more vibrant by focusing on a lot of the social and economic resiliency strategies that we saw worked well after the storm. So the plan itself includes over 257 initiatives. Each initiative has an identified funding source It has an implementation schedule, and we think that this is something that we're going to be able to do over the next 10 years. Now to just give you a little bit of a deep dive in each of those pieces. So as I mentioned, the first layer of defense that we're looking at is really our coastal protection. What you see here is a proposal to invest in a local storm surge barrier around Newtown Creek, and the idea here is to limit a lot of the backdoor flooding that happened during the storm, while also making sure that we're continuing to protect the maritime and industrial uses that are so important to this neighborhood. The city's laid out a first phase of investments that focuses around locally tailored hybrid solutions. It's about $4 billion for that first phase over 37 different initiatives, and it focuses around doing things like increasing our coastal elevations through dunes and raising bulkheads, working to minimize a lot of that destructive wave action that we saw by minimizing upland wave zones through things like investment in wetlands and other wave attenuation strategies. And then also trying to protect against storm surge by keeping the water out. We have a number of integrated flood protection systems that we're looking to invest in areas like Lower Manhattan. And then finally, we're trying to improve the way that all of this is done. So we're working with the federal government to try to streamline a lot of the processes and the ways that these projects get designed and built. In that second layer of protection, there's a number of strategies that we're pushing forward with around protecting our building stock. So we've laid out a number of initiatives to try to strengthen our building code by increasing flood and wind resiliency. For new construction, we're also launching a $1.2 billion incentive program for the 70,000 structures in the floodplain that are already built, to try to focus around protecting those critical systems. And that's going to be paired with a mandate that requires large buildings over 300,000 square feet to invest in these protections by 2030. On infrastructure, we've been working really closely with our utility, Con Ed, to try to harden our power grid. We've been working with them mostly through the rate case to figure out what is the right cost-effective set of storm hardening investments and investments to protect against heat waves. In addition, we're also looking at reconfiguring some of these networks to create greater redundancy through things like microgrids. And then we are also working with the regulators at the state level to try to make sure that they're building in some of these design considerations on an ongoing basis, and that they're establishing a methodology for considering extreme weather impacts as they're evaluating performance moving forward. So as I mentioned, the plan focuses mostly around physical investments, but we did also develop specific neighborhood plans for the impacted communities that bring in elements of some of the social and economic resiliency initiatives that we found to be effective. So we've got 5 impacted communities we've been looking at: Southern Manhattan, the East and South Shores of Staten Island, Southern Brooklyn, and South Queens. And each plan kind of brings together each of the citywide resiliency initiatives within the context of that specific community, and then tries to identify some additional local initiatives through things like the Neighborhood Game Changer competition that we've just announced, which is supposed to provide up to $18 million per community for game-changing investments around their commercial corridors. In addition, we're also working very closely with some community-based planning processes that are being supported by our state and federal partners. So that's sort of the short-term support that we're providing for recovery, but as we start to think longer term about these neighborhoods, we're working to launch neighborhood-based studies that try to look at what types of land use changes might be necessary to support resilient neighborhoods over the long term in these areas. Okay, just a couple notes on implementation. I know I'm almost out of time, but as I mentioned, the total cost of the plan is about $20 billion, approximately half of which is currently funded. We've got about $10 billion in previously allocated city capital, some funding coming in from the federal government in terms of block grants, and then funding for coastal protection and transportation. That leaves about $9.5 billion, $5 billion of which we're expecting to come from future funding in block grant, and then some other resiliency funding for damaged public facilities that the federal government provides, as well as investments from our ratepayers for hardening our power system. That leaves about a $4.5 billion gap, which we're still looking to fill through new federal sources, new allocations of city capital, and then trying to look at some more innovative private financing approaches. So all of this work is being coordinated by my office, the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability. We've basically set up a structure to be able to implement this moving forward. And so we have a team of about 10 to 12 people within the office that are focused exclusively on resiliency. We've also set up internal intra-agency working groups that look at cross-cutting issues like coastal protection and the built environment and resiliency coordination across all the agencies. At the same time, we have a task force that tries to engage external, private, state, and federal infrastructure operators to come up with uniform design criteria. And all of this has been enshrined in the city charter. We're required to report every year on our progress and to update the plan every 4 years. So I think I'll stop there. The short is that there's been a lot of progress already, and we're very excited to keep on working with C40 cities. I think cities are very well placed to understand and make progress on these issues, and I think it's up to us to kind of get on the same page about what are the things that we need from our federal partners, from different donors to support our activities going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Leah. I love the way you describe Sandy as idiosyncratic. Okay, we are tight on time, so we're going to have a very short intervention from Mzukisi Gwata on the city of Joburg, and if I can ask you to keep it just a few minutes so we can maximize our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. My name is Mzukisi Gwata from the city of Johannesburg. The city of Johannesburg started its adaptation work from 2009. And believe it or not, this work was actually, modeling work was actually done by the skills from the Prof's CSEC group at the University of Cape Town. I think perhaps that was the easier part, to sort of develop or downscale models so that we can see what temperature and rainfall is doing, sort of going to the future. But then I think maybe the harder part was to actually take that information and see how climate will actually impact the various sectors in the city. For example, transport, health, water provision, and electricity. But eventually, the priorities that the city of Johannesburg actually came up with regards to the vulnerability of the city related to the extreme rainfall, which could lead to flooding, the extreme temperatures, which could lead to the prevalence of heat waves. We've had 2 episodes already in the last couple of weeks, and this could put burden on the overburdened health system already. And there's also a challenge. As you may have noticed, Johannesburg is actually not situated on a river system. There's no big river that flows through this city. We actually get our water from another country. So if something were to happen to that country, we sort of are in trouble in Johannesburg. But we've lived up to over 100 years like that, with mining and all of that. So in a nutshell, Johannesburg is faced with more or less similar challenges as have been presented here. With problems of flood, we've got problems of extreme heat. We also have got problems of extreme lightning. Many of our people died because of lightning. We've got high lightning incidences. And if you're going to have increase in the intensity of storms, that's how we get our rainfall, mostly from storm events. These are usually associated or at least accompanied by heavy lightning and thunder. I was asked actually to ask questions to my colleagues to the left. I am not going to do that. I'm actually going to ask them, to reflect on perhaps some of the problems or the challenges that we think we have in the city of Johannesburg. I think the whole point really is for Johannesburg, as this has been put elegantly by the Mayor of London, Johannesburg wants to shamelessly copy your ideas. I've got 2 points. We have got an adaptation plan, as you guys may call it, resilience plan. And this plan, as I said, it was actually developed in 2009. My question, or at least what I want you guys to reflect on, how did you manage to take this plan and mainstream it in such a way that it is able to be implemented, you are able to fund the initiatives that are actually highlighted in it? And I think I would like you to sort of broadly address that challenge. I think New York, to an extent, has addressed it, but I'd like to hear from the other 2 cities exactly as to how did they manage to get the plan, or the resilience plan, to sort of become a realizable exercise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good way to start us off. Can the panelists come up and join us? So we have Rodrigo just for a few minutes. So if anybody has a burning question for Rio de Janeiro, we would like to start with that because he's going to have to leave to go and prepare for another session.
You're telling me I'm running out of the question.
Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Hello. Yes. Hi. Yeah. I'm from Singapore, National Climate Change Secretariat in Singapore. I've got a question regarding engagement of the general public on adaptation measures. As we are all aware, climate change and adaptation measures aren't exactly the most exciting topics that citizens worry about. So my question is, in your adaptation plans and implementation of these measures, to what extent do you go out to sort of educate and engage the public? Or is this something like what some of the mayors mentioned, you just do it and you frame it from the view of job creation or how public can benefit from it without referring to climate change? So what is your experience in this? I would like to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to start with that? Yes.
Maybe I should start. Well, I think one way we have seen we slightly changed the message from adaptation to resilience, and that has a meaning behind. I think resilience actually touches people more directly, in the sense that everybody has to be part of it. I mentioned the favelas of Rio, and the most vulnerable ones to climate risks are the ones that are sometimes low educated and have low information. Don't even know what the heck is the word resilience. But as you promote that, first they start knowing, and also people know what is to protect lives, and how this is important to them, and how it affects their own lives. So I think this when you have that message set and you really make it clear to people what is the projected loss of climate risks, or any external factor that might hurt the functioning of a city, or how lives are threatened because the houses are located in high-risk areas, and the next rain might ruin people's lives and their belongings. So that's how you try to engage and leaves from the plan that is in the shelves to every people and every person's lives.
Can I just encourage you to keep your answers quite short and compact?
Okay, I try.
So we can get to more questions.
What I was thinking, listen to your question, is about we could reach the general population with the activity of the risk reduction activity, just to teach to the people how to face to the big events. We have also industrial risk that is connected. We use the same tools to manage it. And then we have a vision of the adaptation resilience that we share with with the Europe, with the other countries from Europe that were reflecting about this theme. And we have adaptation plans that in our case are most of all involving big institutions. Venice is kind of particular site. We have the port authority, we have the airport, we have big industries, and also we have, I didn't mention it in the presentation before, universities, a lot of scientific research entities that help us. And this is about adaptation, that we mean it's mitigation and adaptation. We bring together the two tasks. Then the resilience, it's something that have much more to do with the changing of the model, of the developing model. So learn how to face big extreme events and then change the way in the future we want to have our city. So it's a kind of a strategic plan done on consistent scientific basis about how the environment will put the limits of our development. So we have, and so in this last case, the resilient city should be something that will involve the citizens for sure. That's the goal.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so I think, public engagement's critical. Sandy for New York City and for a lot of the Northeast in the US was kind of a wake-up call. And so there's been a lot of public conversation, particularly within the impacted communities. So there's, I think, we did a lot of outreach. We had task forces that we were setting up as we developed the plan of community-based organizations and elected officials in each community. We went out to talk to them every 2 weeks to help them understand the types of things that we were learning and get their feedback. There have been additional processes that have been set up beyond that for basically regional coastal protection that's being funded by the federal government. And then the state also has a community-based planning. All of that is tied to money and projects. And so there's a pretty focused conversation, I would say, in a lot of the Sandy-affected communities about how to rebuild and how to allocate this money. And I think that's been a really important and useful exercise. It has been a little bit harder to reach some of the communities that were not impacted by the storm but that are vulnerable. And we're just kind of starting to work through what a lot of that looks like. I would say that, again, we found that engaging people around very particular things that impact them tends to be the most successful way of approaching the conversation. So, for example, a lot of communities that are outside the impacted areas but are vulnerable are those that are going to be in our expanded 100-year floodplain. And so we have a very robust consumer education campaign which we're about to launch that'll go out to those areas and start to talk to them about what it means to be in the floodplain, what their risks are, and what the implications are in terms of protecting themselves and then also flood insurance requirements. So those are some of the kinds of things I think we've been doing around community stuff.
Thanks, Leah. Just before the question, Katie, what's our firm deadline? Another 15 minutes. Great. That's excellent. Thank you. Sorry. Yes, we'll get you. Yeah, thanks.
Slightly unusual voice in this arena. I'm from a commercial bank, Standard Bank. I'd just be interested to know in how actively you've engaged your business community and indeed your financial sector, because we're often called upon to fund property development, et cetera, and the access to appropriate information to manage the risks is not always available. Historical 1 in 50-year floods, 1 in 100-year floodlines are no longer really adequate indicators. So I'd be interested to know.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I jump in? My question parallels that.
Sure, please do. Yeah.
Hi, Steve Hammer from the World Bank. One of the issues that we're seeing as we begin to do work and have conversations with different cities relates exactly to this data availability question. And New York City and Venice apparently are blessed with access to good longitudinal climate data or weather data that allows your scientific experts to make these detailed projections. I'm beginning to undertake work, my colleagues are beginning to undertake work in cities where there is no such access. And so here the role of the IPCC in informing the skepticism or how carefully we employ science in advising cities on their planning process is very critical. And so access to this information is going to be a key limiting factor in the development of strategies that are as complex or robust as what you offer. So I'm interested in, what guidance you might advise my institution or other cities who are not blessed with the same level of information resources as your cities are.
Thank you. I'd love to answer that, but I'm not on the panel. So business and information resources.
I think in the US we're fortunate to have the federal government providing a lot of climate information, which is pretty robust. And so it is true that FEMA's latest flood maps are based on information about existing risks, but that is sort of the best available science. We have these new set of flood maps. They have implications for all of our commercial banks because they are the ones that are supposed to be asking people that have federally backed mortgages whether or not they in fact have flood insurance and making sure that they provide the information about their structure and policies. So we've been doing a lot with the state regulators to try to reach out to the insurance community and then also to banks to help them start to understand what their responsibilities are and to make sure that they're actually implementing some of these requirements appropriately. And I think that's kind of the first step for us in a much broader private sector conversation. Separately, there's been a lot of conversation around access to financing, and so there has been a little bit of discussion with some of the financial folks around things like cat bonds and other more innovative financing approaches for some of the strategies that we're looking about doing. I guess my own personal thoughts, not necessarily the city's perspective, but we've been talking a long time in New York about different building blocks that make up a risk assessment. And I don't think that you necessarily have to have gold standard information. You just have to have certain basic understanding of where people live, what kind of structures you have, generally, what's vulnerable to different types of risks. And then you have to think about drilling down into the things that you think are actually a problem. So we spent a lot of time pre-Sandy trying to understand everything in the kitchen sink. And I think, Sandy really kind of brought into focus what our very specific problems were. So for example, we really care about power loss. Asset damage models don't tell you when the power is going to go out. So we spent a long time trying to figure out what was driving power loss. What we found from that is that there are about 9 substations in the city that drive most power outages. And if you want to really make sure that you're not getting power outages, you're going to focus investments around those assets. And that kind of analysis is really important because otherwise I think you're going to sprinkle money across systems in an inefficient way.
Well, I can say that for us, the private finance is really a lack in our system. All the activity we have are based on public finance. Public finances and the relationship with the private system, it's not so well regulated by laws in our country. For example, we don't have private insurance for natural disasters on buildings and on infrastructure, and this is, I think, could be a very important field to develop, also to, to let people understand on where put money, and also the insurance company maybe could invest in some work to reduce the risk they insured. But I do agree that the focus has to be on the technical solutions. At the same time, the scientific data are fundamental, really important, and the connection has to be thought in this way. I think it's my opinion. In a simple way, maybe the city, the local government have to manage money to make works, but it have to take the decision on really consistent and shared scientific data and basis. Because if not, it's arbitrary. I don't know how to say. We're going to feel that everybody can say everything and just to protect his own interests. So the scientific bases are fundamental, but money has to go to to have final works to be done on the ground. Okay. Okay, like we have also need. I would like to highlight that in Venice we have a strong scientific system. We have 3 universities working on the laguna and the city, and with a special agency that coordinate them. And we have also international scientific bodies like IPCCs settled in Venice too, CNR national level. Research agency, so it's something to work on to get all these really good quality data and research to be transferred to the ground, to the works.
Okay. Thank you. We have time for one last quick question. Anything from this side? Yes. And if I could ask you to keep your answers very brief, because we're really running out of time. Thank you.
Right. Hi, my name is Richard Day. I'm from Arup in South Africa. I was talking to Professor Jürgen Randers recently about a lot of the climate action issues. And one of the things he said was that, in his view, in terms of carbon reduction, there isn't the political will to deal with that. So a lot of the intervention is going to be around mitigation, adaptation. But money will not be spent on adaptation until events happen. So the point I'm coming to is political will. Now, I mean, in New York, you had Hurricane Sandy, which concentrated the mines. The interventions that you're looking at or you're working through in Venice are very long wave infrastructure-based interventions. You've been working on this for hundreds of years, and you've got another 100 years of interventions to go through. How do you maintain the momentum across shortwave political boundaries? 5-year terms, and sometimes even with the same political party, but handing over to a new administration. How do you maintain the momentum?
Excellent question. Thank you.
Yeah, but that's the real task. We don't. We're not really able. After a week, when the news get outside from the papers on the cover page of the papers, priorities changes. Nobody thinks to that dramatic events anymore. It's a really short attention time. This is something that I want to suggest also to the scientific world to work on, to try to translate in the most effective words as possible the forecasts, the provisions, what will happen in the future. Because people have to understand, politicians listen to people, and so people have to understand what's the risk, the real one, that affects everybody. It's really, it's real. It's real. It's important to let people understand. It's something we are working with the scientific world. There are projects to make data translated in the most usable way. That's the point, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, last mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. But the kinds of things that we've tried to do, start to think about how you would integrate this kind of into the DNA of a community. So, we've tried to integrate the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability as a structure that exists and is responsible for kind of integrating all of this into city agency activities. We've got a lot of funding, so that definitely helps to focus people. And then separately, we're spending a lot of time trying to get out into the communities and really talk about what it is we're doing and make sure that the plan stays relevant and focused on the things that they need the most. So,
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. I think the question I have remaining that's unanswered is how do we change people's mindsets? But I'm sure you're going to deal with that. And can we thank the speakers once more? And have a good day. Thank you.